"Your daughter isn't safe with your husband," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the clatter of dinner plates. The words hit me like ice water, freezing my blood as I stood in the doorway of our kitchen, watching our housekeeper meticulously arrange the evening's dishes. Her eyes darted nervously toward the living room, where David's laughter mingled with 8-year-old Sophie's delighted giggles as they played video games together. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What do you mean?" The question came out sharper than intended, but Maria had been with our family for 3 years. She'd never spoken out of turn, never created drama, never said anything that wasn't carefully considered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's weathered hands trembled as she set down the final plate. At 52, she'd worked for wealthy families across Manhattan for over 2 decades. Her reputation was impeccable, her references spotless, her discretion absolute. That's exactly why David had insisted we hire her through the most exclusive domestic agency in the city. "The cameras," she murmured, glancing toward the hidden security system David had installed throughout our Park Avenue penthouse. "I've seen things that aren't right." My breath caught. David controlled every aspect of our security system. He'd installed it himself, claiming his background in cybersecurity for Fortune 500 companies made him the only person he trusted with our family's safety. I'd never questioned it, never even asked for access. Why would I? David was my husband, Sophie's father, the man who'd swept me off my feet 5 years ago with his devotion to us both. What kind of things? I managed, though part of me wanted to run from this conversation, to pretend I'd never heard those words. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Charlotte, I've worked for many families. I know what normal looks like." "This isn't normal." Before she could elaborate, David's voice boomed from the living room. "Charlotte, come see Sophie's high score. She's beating me at my own game." His tone was warm, proud, exactly what you'd expect from a loving father. "Coming," I called back, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I looked at Maria, whose face had gone pale. "We'll talk later," I whispered. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Tonight, after they're asleep. Meet me in the service hallway by the laundry room. And Mrs. Charlotte," she paused, her voice dropping even lower, "don't let him know we talked." I walked into the living room on unsteady legs, forcing a smile as David pulled me onto the couch beside him and Sophie. His arm wrapped around me possessively, his hand resting just above my hip in that casual way that had once made me feel cherished. Now it felt like a chain. "Daddy's teaching me all the secret moves," Sophie announced, her blonde curls bouncing as she focused intently on the screen. She looked so much like David with her blue eyes and sharp jawline, though she had my delicate features and gentle temperament. "That's wonderful." "Sweetheart," I managed, watching David's profile as he guided Sophie's small hands on the controller. He was undeniably handsome at 38, with the kind of classical features that had caught my attention at that charity gala 5 years ago. His success as a cybersecurity consultant had afforded us this lifestyle, this penthouse, this perfect facade of family life. But Maria's words echoed in my mind. "Your daughter isn't safe with your husband." "Charlotte, you're tense," David observed, his hand moving to massage my shoulder. His touch was expert, knowing exactly where I carried stress. "Rough day at the gallery?" I owned a small but prestigious art gallery in Soho, specializing in emerging contemporary artists. It was my passion project, something David had encouraged when we'd first married. "Just tired," I lied, leaning into his touch despite the growing unease in my stomach. "Maybe we should get you to bed early tonight," he suggested, his voice carrying that particular tone that indicated it wasn't really a suggestion. "Sophie can stay up a little later with me." "Can't you, princess?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Can we watch a movie, Daddy? One of our special movies?" Something cold slithered down my spine. "What special movies?" "Oh, just some documentaries about technology and gaming," David answered smoothly. "Sophie's showing real aptitude for understanding complex systems." I think she might follow in her old man's footsteps. I looked at my daughter, so trusting, so adoring of her father. Maybe I should stay up too. We could make it a family movie night. Mommy, you always fall asleep during the boring parts, Sophie giggled. Daddy says the important stuff happens when you're not paying attention. The words hit me like a physical blow. When I'm not paying attention? How many times had David orchestrated moments alone with Sophie when I was distracted, tired, or working late at the gallery? Actually, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, I think tonight Sophie should go to bed at her regular time. She has school tomorrow. David's hand tightened on my shoulder, just enough pressure to remind me of his strength. Charlotte, it's Friday night. Let her have a little fun. But I was already standing, extending my hand to Sophie. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you ready for bed. You can show me your new art project. For a split second, I saw something flash across David's face. Annoyance? Anger? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it, replaced by his usual indulgent smile. Of course, he said, though his voice had cooled slightly. Family first, right? As I helped Sophie with her bedtime routine, I found myself studying our home with new eyes. The penthouse was David's design entirely, chosen and furnished while I was dealing with my mother's final illness 3 years ago. Every room was perfectly appointed, every detail carefully considered. And now I realized every corner was under surveillance. The cameras were subtle, positioned as decorative elements or hidden within the crown molding. How many times had David reviewed footage of our daily lives? How many private moments had he cataloged and stored? Mommy, you're brushing too hard, Sophie protested, pulling me back to the present. Sorry, baby. I gentled my touch, looking at my daughter's reflection in her vanity mirror. She was so innocent, so trusting. The thought that anyone might harm her made my hands shake. Daddy says I'm special, Sophie said as I helped her into her pajamas. He says I understand things other kids don't. What kind of things? Secret things. Important things about computers and cameras and how to keep secrets. My blood turned to ice. What secrets, Sophie? But she was already climbing into bed, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. Just special daddy-daughter secrets. He says all families have them. I tucked her in with trembling hands, kissing her forehead and inhaling her sweet scent. Sophie, you know you can tell Mommy anything, right? Any secret? Any worry? Anything at all? She nodded solemnly. I know, Mommy, but some secrets are just for daddies and daughters. That's what makes them special. After Sophie fell asleep, I found David in his study, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying code and security feeds. The room was his sanctuary, off-limits to both Sophie and me under the guise of client confidentiality. She settled down okay? He asked without turning around. Yes. I hovered in the doorway, suddenly aware that I'd never been invited fully into this space. David, can I ask you something? Of course. He swiveled in his chair, giving me his full attention. In the blue glow of the monitors, his features looked sharp, predatory. The security cameras. Can I get access to the feeds? Sometimes when I'm at the gallery, I worry about Sophie. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us. The system is very complex, Charlotte. It requires specialized knowledge to operate safely. Besides, Maria watches Sophie when you're out. Isn't that enough? I'd just feel better if I could check in occasionally. David stood, moving toward me with that smooth grace that had once made my heart race. Now it made me want to step backward. Sweetheart, I handle all the technical aspects of our security so you don't have to worry about them. Trust me, I'm monitoring everything that matters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Besides, he continued, his hand coming up to cup my face, you're terrible with technology. Remember when you couldn't even figure out the new coffee machine? It was said with a fond smile, but the dismissal stung. David had always handled all our technology, claiming I was too scattered, too artistic, too emotional to deal with the complexities of modern systems. I'd accepted it, even been grateful for it. Now I wondered what else I'd been excluded from in the name of my supposed incompetence. I should check on Sophie, I said, stepping back from his touch. She's fine, David assured me. The monitoring system would alert us to any problems. That's the beauty of comprehensive surveillance. Nothing happens without my knowledge. The words sent chills down my spine. Nothing happens without my knowledge. How long had he been watching us? Cataloging our movements, our conversations, our private moments? I'm tired, I said abruptly. I think I'll go to bed. I'll be up soon, David promised, already turning back to his monitors. Just finishing up some client work. In our bedroom, I changed into my nightgown with mechanical movements, hyper-aware of the small camera nestled in the crown molding above our dresser. How many times had David watched me through that lens? How many intimate moments had been recorded and stored? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for David's breathing to even out beside me. He'd come to bed an hour later, sliding under the covers and pulling me against him with the possessive gesture that had become routine. His hand had wandered across my body with familiar confidence, but I'd feigned sleep, my skin crawling at his touch. Now, at 2 a.m., he was finally deeply asleep. I slipped from bed with practiced silence, padding barefoot through our home's darkened hallways. The service corridor was tucked behind the kitchen, originally designed for staff to move through the apartment without disturbing the family. I'd barely known it existed until tonight. Maria was waiting in the shadows, still fully dressed despite the late hour. She pressed a finger to her lips, then motioned for me to follow her into the laundry room. The space was soundproofed, and I realized, one of the few areas without visible cameras. I've been waiting 3 hours, she whispered, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. Tell me, I breathed, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would wake the entire building. Maria pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through what appeared to be video files. I started noticing things 6 months ago. The way Mr. David would send me on errands when Sophie came home from school. How he'd always volunteer for bath time and bedtime stories. Little things that didn't feel right. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. I've worked for families where the fathers were inappropriate with the children. I know the signs? What signs? The words came out as barely a whisper. The way he touches her. Too long, too familiar. The private conversations where he tells her she's special, that she understands things other children don't. The way he's isolating her from you. My legs gave out. I sank onto the washing machine, my vision blurring. No, David loves Sophie. He would never— Mrs. Charlotte, Maria interrupted gently. I've been recording things. Secret recordings on my personal phone. Things I've seen, conversations I've overheard. You need to see them, she handed me the phone. The first video was timestamped from 3 weeks ago. It showed David in Sophie's room during what I thought was a normal bedtime routine. But as I watched, my blood turned to ice. His hands lingered too long as he helped her change into pajamas. His touches were subtle but inappropriate, camouflaged as innocent affection. The way he positioned himself, the things he whispered to her about secrets and special games. It was all wrong. Everything was wrong. There's more, Maria whispered. Much more. The next video showed David in his study with Sophie, teaching her about the camera system. But he wasn't just showing her how it worked. He was teaching her how to turn off specific cameras, how to create blind spots in the surveillance network. He's been grooming her, Maria said softly. Teaching her that what they do together is normal, that it's their special secret. And he's been using the security system to monitor when you're not watching, to create opportunities. I thought I was going to vomit. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the phone. How long have you been recording? 6 months. I started when I realized what was happening, but I needed evidence. I needed proof before I could come to you. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The question came out harsher than I intended. Maria's face crumpled. Because I was scared. Mr. David, he's very powerful, very smart. He controls everything in this house, including the cameras that are supposed to protect you. I was afraid he'd find out, that he'd fire me and you'd never know the truth. She was right. David did control everything. The security system, our finances, our social connections. he'd carefully positioned himself as the center of our universe. And he'd done it so gradually, so skillfully, that I'd never noticed how isolated and dependent we'd become. "Mrs. Charlotte," Maria continued, her voice urgent, "there's something else. The recordings he makes of Sophie, they're not just stored locally. I've seen him uploading files to external servers." The room spun around me. "What are you saying?" "I think he's sharing them. Or selling them. The timestamps show regular uploads, always late at night when you're sleeping." I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting back bile. My husband, Sophie's father, the man I'd trusted with our lives, he was not just abusing our daughter, he was documenting it and distributing it to others. "We have to call the police," I whispered. Maria shook her head. "He'll know immediately. The security system monitors all communications. Your phone, the landline, even your computer, everything goes through his network. If you call from here, he'll be alerted within seconds." "Then what do we do?" "You need to get Sophie away from him first. Safely, quietly, without triggering his surveillance. Then we can go to the authorities with the evidence." I looked at the phone still clutched in my trembling hands, at the horrific proof of my husband's crimes. How do we do that without him knowing? Maria had clearly been thinking about this for months. Tomorrow is Saturday. Mr. David usually goes to his office for a few hours to work on weekend projects. While he's gone, you take Sophie out, tell her you're going shopping or to the park. But instead, you go to the police station. He tracks our phones. He'll know exactly where we are. Leave the phones here. I'll make it look like you and Sophie are still in the apartment. I know which cameras to avoid, where the blind spots are. Mr. David taught me the system himself, remember? The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. David's need to control every aspect of our lives, including our household staff, had given Maria the knowledge she needed to help us escape his surveillance. But won't he notice we're gone when he comes back? That's why you need to move fast. Get to the police, show them the videos, get them to arrest him before he realizes what's happening. I stared at the phone screen, at the frozen image of my husband's hands on my daughter's body. The man I'd married, the father I'd trusted, was a predator who'd been systematically abusing Sophie right under my nose. "There's one more thing," Maria said quietly. "I think Mr. David might suspect that I know something. This week, he's been asking me questions about my schedule, about what I do when he's not home. I think he's testing me." Fear shot through me. "What kind of questions?" "Whether I ever go into his study, whether Sophie has said anything unusual to me, whether I've noticed any problems with the security cameras. And yesterday he offered me a vacation bonus if I wanted to visit my sister in Guatemala next month. He was trying to get rid of her. Just like he'd gradually isolated me from my friends and family, David was working to remove the one witness to his crimes. "We have to do this tomorrow," I whispered. "Before he sends you away." Maria nodded. "But Mrs. Charlotte, you need to be very careful. Don't let him suspect anything has changed. Act normal. Be the same wife you've always been. If he realizes you know—" She didn't need to finish. A man who could systematically abuse his own daughter while maintaining the facade of a loving father was capable of anything. I handed back her phone, my mind already racing through tomorrow's plan. "What time does he usually leave for the office on Saturdays?" "Around 10. He likes to sleep in, have his coffee, read the news. He'll be gone by 10:30 at the latest." "And how long does he usually stay?" 3 to 4 hours. Sometimes longer if he's working on a big project. That would give us enough time to get to the police station, file a report, and hopefully get protective custody before David realized we were gone. But first, I had to survive the next 18 hours without him suspecting anything. "Maria," I said as we prepared to leave the laundry room. "Thank you. I don't know how to—" "You don't need to thank me," she interrupted. "That little girl is innocent. What he's doing to her—" She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "No child should have to endure that." We slipped back through the darkened apartment separately, Maria returning to her small room off the kitchen while I made my way back to the master bedroom. David was still sleeping deeply, his face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through our windows. Looking at him now, I tried to reconcile this serene image with the monster Maria had revealed. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind to what was happening to my own daughter? I slipped back into bed, lying rigid beside the man who'd betrayed us in the most heinous way possible. Every time David moved in his sleep, every time his hand brushed against me, my skin crawled. But I forced myself to remain still, to breathe evenly, to maintain the illusion that nothing had changed. Tomorrow, I would save my daughter. Tonight, I had to survive. As dawn crept across the Manhattan skyline, I watched David's sleeping face and planned our escape. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. Sophie would be safe, David would be arrested, and our carefully constructed life would crumble. But first, I had to be the perfect wife for just a little longer. I had to smile and laugh and pretend that I hadn't seen the truth. I had to act normal while my world fell apart around me. The hardest part would be looking at Sophie over breakfast, knowing what had been done to her, and not breaking down completely. But I would do it. I would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant playing one last role in David's twisted game. The morning light grew stronger, and David began to stir beside me. In a few hours, our real lives would begin. But first, I had to survive this final performance. Saturday morning arrived with the cruel normalcy of sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows. David stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist in what I'd once interpreted as affection. Now I understood it as possession, control, the unconscious need to monitor even my sleep. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured against my neck, his voice carrying that morning roughness that had once sent shivers of desire through me. Now it made my skin crawl. "Morning?" I managed, forcing myself not to pull away as his lips brushed my shoulder. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to grab Sophie and flee immediately. But Maria's words echoed in my mind. Act normal. Be the same wife you've always been. David's hand traced patterns on my stomach, his touch intimate and familiar. Sophie's still sleeping. We could have some time to ourselves. The suggestion made my stomach lurch. How could he touch me, want me, while harboring such darkness toward our daughter? The compartmentalization was terrifying, the way he could shift between devoted husband and predatory father without missing a beat. "I should check on her," I said, starting to rise. His hand pressed me back down, gentle but firm. "She's fine, Charlotte. The monitors would alert us if anything was wrong." His fingers found the hem of my nightgown. "You've been so tense lately. Let me help you relax." I closed my eyes, fighting back revulsion as David's hands moved across my body with practiced expertise. He knew exactly how to touch me, what I'd once responded to, how to make my body betray my mind. But now, knowing what those same hands had done to Sophie, I felt nothing but disgust. "David," I whispered, placing my hand over his to stop its movement. "I'm just not in the mood this morning." He paused, and I felt his attention sharpen. In 5 years of marriage, I'd rarely refused his advances. David was skilled, patient, and had always made my pleasure a priority. It was one of the things that had made me fall in love with him, this focused attention to my desires. "Are you feeling all right?" His voice carried a note of concern that sounded genuine. "You've seemed distant lately." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Just tired. The gallery's been demanding, and with the new exhibition coming up, maybe you should take a break," David suggested, his hand moving to stroke my hair. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. Sophie and I barely see you anymore." The irony was suffocating. He was positioning himself as the concerned husband worried about his wife's work-life balance, when in reality he was creating opportunities to be alone with our daughter. "Maybe you're right," I said carefully. "I have been working a lot of late nights recently." "That's my girl," David said, kissing my forehead. "Family first, remember? Sophie needs her mother around, but not as much as she needs protection from her father," I thought bitterly. We rose and dressed with the choreographed ease of long marriage. David in his weekend uniform of expensive jeans and a crisp button-down, me in yoga pants and a soft sweater that Sophie liked to snuggle against. Normal Saturday morning attire for a normal family about to have a normal breakfast, except nothing about our family was normal, and after today, nothing would ever be the same. Sophie was already awake when we entered her room. Sitting in bed with her favorite book spread across her lap, she looked up with a smile that broke my heart, so trusting and innocent despite everything that had been done to her. "Morning, Daddy." "Morning, Mommy." She bounced slightly, her blonde curls catching the morning light. "Can we make pancakes today? The special ones with the chocolate chips?" "Of course, Princess," David said, scooping her up for a hug that I now watched with horror. His hands were careful, appropriate, but I could see the subtle signs Maria had pointed out. The way he held her just a moment too long. How his fingers brushed against areas they shouldn't. The whispered words about how special she was. "Let's get you dressed first," I said quickly, moving to Sophie's dresser. "Then we'll make the best pancakes ever." David's eyes followed my movements as I selected Sophie's clothes for the day. I chose her favorite dress, bright yellow with sunflowers. Something cheerful for what I hoped would be her last morning in this house of horrors. "Actually," David said casually, "I might need to pop into the office for a few hours today. Johnson's been having issues with the Meridian system, and I promised I'd take a look." My hands stilled on Sophie's dress. This was it, the opening Maria had predicted. David was creating his own opportunity to leave, just as he had so many times before. "On a Saturday?" I asked, playing the mildly disappointed wife. "You know how it is with cybersecurity," David shrugged. "Hackers don't take weekends off. Besides, it shouldn't take more than a few hours. You and Sophie can have some quality mother-daughter time." The manipulation was masterful. He was framing his absence as a gift to me, time to bond with my daughter that I supposedly didn't get enough of due to my work schedule. Meanwhile, he was probably calculating how many hours of uninterrupted access he'd have to Sophie upon his return. "Will you be back for lunch?" I asked, hating how normal I sounded. "Should be. Maybe we can take Sophie to that new ice cream place she's been talking about." Sophie clapped her hands in delight. "Really, Daddy? The one with the bubblegum flavor?" "Anything for my special girl," David said, ruffling her hair. The endearment that had once seemed sweet now sounded like a threat. Breakfast was an exercise in controlled terror. I sat at our dining room table, making pancakes and pouring orange juice while David read news on his tablet, and Sophie chattered about her weekend plans. The scene was picture-perfect domestic bliss, worthy of a lifestyle magazine spread. But I was acutely aware of the cameras recording every moment, of Maria moving quietly in the background as she prepared for her role in our escape plan. Every smile I forced, every laugh I manufactured, every casual touch I allowed from David felt like a betrayal of Sophie and myself. "These are perfect, Mommy," Sophie said around a mouthful of pancake. "Almost as good as Daddy's." "Almost?" I raised an eyebrow in mock offense. "I'll have you know I've been perfecting my pancake technique. Daddy puts extra chocolate chips in his," Sophie confided. "And he makes funny shapes sometimes. Animals and flowers and things." I glanced at David, who was smiling indulgently at our daughter. "When did he make these special pancakes? During the mornings when I left early for the gallery? The evenings when I worked late? How many intimate domestic moments had he created with Sophie while I was conveniently absent? Maybe next time Daddy can show me his technique," I said carefully. "It's not really technique," David said, reaching over to wipe a spot of syrup from Sophie's chin. His touch was gentle, paternal, completely normal to anyone watching. "It's about paying attention to what makes each person special. Sophie likes extra chocolate chips and silly shapes because she has a sweet tooth and a creative spirit, just like her mom." The comment was directed at me, a reminder of the early days of our relationship when David had surprised me with elaborate breakfasts shaped like flowers and hearts. Back then, I'd been charmed by his attention to detail, his dedication to making me happy. Now I recognized it as part of a pattern, the way he studied people, learned their weaknesses and desires, then used that knowledge to manipulate them. "I should head out soon," David announced, checking his watch. "Traffic's going to be brutal if I wait much longer. Do you need lunch packed?" I asked, playing the dutiful wife. I'll grab something from the deli downstairs from the office. He leaned over to kiss my cheek, his lips lingering just long enough to seem affectionate. Take care of our girl. The possessive pronouns weren't lost on me. Not take care of Sophie, but our girl, as if she were a shared possession rather than an individual person with rights and autonomy. After David left, I felt marginally safer, but exponentially more terrified. The clock was ticking now. According to Maria's timeline, we had perhaps 3 hours before David returned. 3 hours to get Sophie to safety, file a police report, and set in motion the legal machinery that would protect her from further harm. What should we do today, Mommy? Sophie asked, bouncing in her chair as she finished the last of her pancakes. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, searching for signs of trauma, of damage, of the abuse Maria had documented. Sophie seemed normal, happy, well-adjusted. But I'd learned enough about childhood sexual abuse to know that victims often appeared perfectly normal on the surface. Children were remarkably adaptable, especially when the abuse was gradual and committed by someone they trusted. How about we go for a walk in the park? I suggested. Just the two of us. Can we bring my camera? Daddy taught me how to use it and I want to take pictures of the fall leaves. My blood chilled. Daddy taught me how to use it. Another skill David had shared with Sophie. Another technology lesson that could have darker implications. Was he teaching her photography for innocent purposes, or was there something more sinister involved? Of course, sweetheart. Go get your camera while I clean up here. As Sophie skipped away to her room, Maria appeared at my elbow with a dish towel. She seems normal, I whispered, my voice barely audible. They usually do, Maria replied quietly. That's what makes it so hard to detect. The smart ones, like Mr. David, they're very careful. They make the child feel special, chosen. They normalize the behavior gradually. But she's so happy. Children want to please their parents, especially the parent who gives them special attention. Mr. David has been very clever about making the abuse feel like love, like a privilege rather than a violation. I gripped the edge of the counter, fighting waves of nausea. How do I protect her without destroying her innocence? Without making her afraid of affection, of trust? You get her professional help, Maria said firmly. Therapists who specialize in childhood trauma. They know how to help children heal without creating more damage. Sophie returned with her small digital camera, the one David had given her for her 8th birthday. As she showed me the photos she'd taken recently, I searched each image for signs of inappropriate content. But they were exactly what you'd expect from a child's camera. Pictures of our cat, flowers from our terrace garden, candid shots of me working at my laptop. This one's my favorite, Sophie said, showing me a photo of David pushing her on the swing set in our building's rooftop playground. His hands were on her back, propelling her forward, both of them laughing. It looked like pure joy, a perfect father-daughter moment. How could something that looked so innocent be part of something so evil? That's a beautiful picture, baby, I managed. Ready for our walk? Can we stop by the toy store? Daddy said he might buy me a new game next weekend. What kind of game? A computer game. He says I'm getting really good at learning about technology and software and stuff. Another chill ran down my spine. Was David using educational software as another grooming tool? Teaching Sophie to be comfortable with technology so she'd be more compliant when he introduced cameras, recording equipment, or online platforms for sharing content. We'll see, I said noncommittally. Let's focus on enjoying our walk first. I gathered my purse, making sure my wallet and identification were inside but leaving my phone on the kitchen counter as Maria had instructed. The device felt like a security blanket, and abandoning it made me feel exposed and vulnerable. But if David was monitoring our communications as Maria suspected, the phone was more liability than asset. Aren't you bringing your phone, Mommy? Sophie asked, noticing my empty hands. I want to focus on you today, I said, hoping my voice sounded casual. No distractions. Sophie beamed at this announcement and my heart broke a little more. When had I become the kind of mother whose undivided attention was noteworthy? How had David's manipulations driven such a wedge between Sophie and me that she was surprised by my presence, my focus, my care? We left the apartment hand in hand, Sophie chattering about the photos she planned to take and the games we might play at the park. I nodded and responded appropriately, but my mind was calculating distances and timing. The nearest police station was 6 blocks away. If we walked at Sophie's pace, stopping to take pictures and enjoy the morning, it would take us about 20 minutes to reach it. The October air was crisp and clear, perfect for photography. Sophie snapped pictures of everything that caught her eye: a street musician, a hot dog vendor, a woman walking 3 small dogs. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for brief moments I could almost forget the horror that had driven us from our home. "Mommy, look!" Sophie tugged on my hand, pointing toward the playground in Riverside Park. "Can we swing for a little bit?" My heart clenched as I remembered the photo she'd shown me, the one of David pushing her on a similar swing. But Sophie was looking at me with such hope, such innocent joy that I couldn't refuse. "Of course, baby. Just for a few minutes." I pushed Sophie on the swings, her delighted laughter echoing across the playground. She pumped her legs, trying to go higher, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner. For these precious moments, she was just a normal 8-year-old girl enjoying a beautiful autumn morning with her mother. But even as I treasured these moments, I was hyper-aware of the time. We'd been gone 45 minutes. David would expect us to return home for lunch, would become suspicious if we were gone too long. And Maria was back at the apartment, maintaining the illusion that we were still there, creating the digital footprints necessary to keep David unaware of our true location. "Time to go, sweetheart," I said gently as Sophie's swing began to slow. "Already? But we just got here." "I know, but we have more adventures planned for today." I helped her down from the swing, my hands trembling slightly as I straightened her dress. "Remember what I told you about always being able to tell Mommy anything?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Well, today we're going to visit some people who help keep children safe. They're going to ask you some questions, and I want you to tell them the truth, okay? Even if it's about secrets you thought you weren't supposed to share." Confusion flickered across Sophie's face. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about how people touch you, or things they might have asked you to do that felt funny or wrong. Even if someone you love very much asked you to keep it secret, like Daddy's special games?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Sophie's voice was small, uncertain, as if she was testing whether this was something she was allowed to discuss. "Yes, baby," I whispered, kneeling down to her eye level. "Especially things like that." Sophie's lower lip began to tremble. "Am I in trouble?" "Daddy said I could never tell anyone about our special time together because it would hurt people's feelings and break up our family." Rage flooded through me, white hot and consuming. David had not only abused our daughter, but had manipulated her into believing she was responsible for protecting the family secret. He'd made her complicit in her own victimization, burdened her with the weight of adult consequences for actions she couldn't possibly understand. "No, Sophie," I said firmly, taking her small hands in mine. "You are not in trouble. You have never been in trouble. And nothing you tell these people will be your fault, okay? Sometimes adults do things that are wrong, and it's never the child's responsibility to keep those secrets." Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. "But Daddy said—" "I know what Daddy said. But Mommy is telling you that it's safe to talk about anything that's happened. These people I'm taking you to meet, their job is to protect children and help families. They won't be angry with you, and they won't let anyone hurt you." Sophie nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Will Daddy be mad at me?" The question shattered what remained of my composure. My 8-year-old daughter was more worried about disappointing her abuser than about her own safety and well-being. The psychological manipulation David had employed was sophisticated and devastating. "Daddy won't be able to be mad at you," I said carefully. "The people we're going to see will make sure of that." Hand in hand, we walked the final 3 blocks to the police station. With each step, I felt as though I was crossing a bridge that would burn behind us. There would be no going back to our old life, no pretending that we were a normal family, no returning to the comfortable illusions that had protected me from the truth. The police station was a squat brick building that looked reassuringly solid and official. As we climbed the steps to the entrance, Sophie's grip on my hand tightened. "Mommy, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I'm scared too. But sometimes we have to be brave so that we can protect the people we love, including ourselves." I thought but didn't say. The lobby was busy with Saturday morning activity, officers processing paperwork, citizens filing reports, the general bureaucratic hum of law enforcement. I approached the front desk with Sophie close beside me, her small hand clutching my fingers like a lifeline. "I need to report child sexual abuse," I said quietly to the desk sergeant, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair. The words hung in the air between us, final and irrevocable. There was no taking them back, no pretending I hadn't spoken them. I had just destroyed my marriage, shattered my family, and set in motion a chain of events that would change everything Sophie and I had ever known. But as I looked down at my daughter, so small and vulnerable beside me, I knew I had made the only choice possible. Whatever came next, whatever legal battles and emotional trauma lay ahead, Sophie would be safe, and that was worth any price I had to pay. The desk sergeant's expression shifted immediately from routine bureaucracy to sharp attention. Within minutes, Sophie and I were seated in a small interview room with Detective Lisa Rodriguez, a specialist in crimes against children whose calm demeanor and gentle voice seemed to put Sophie at ease. "Mrs. Hartwell," Detective Rodriguez said, reviewing the initial report I'd given, "I need to ask you some difficult questions. Is your daughter safe to be here with us right now? Is there any immediate danger?" "My husband doesn't know we're here," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "He thinks we're at home. Our housekeeper is covering for us, but he'll be back from his office in about 2 hours." "And you believe he'll become suspicious or violent when he discovers you've reported this?" The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. What would David do when he realized I knew? The man who'd systematically abused our daughter while maintaining the facade of a loving husband and father was clearly capable of things I'd never imagined. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's very intelligent, very controlling. He monitors everything through our home security system. If he finds out what we've done," Detective Rodriguez nodded, making notes, "we'll arrange for protective custody while we investigate." "Sophie, sweetheart," she turned to my daughter, who was sitting quietly beside me, "I'm going to ask you to talk with someone else for a little while. Her name is Dr. Sarah, and she's really good at talking with kids about difficult things." As if summoned, a woman in her 50s entered the room. Dr. Sarah Chen had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wore a soft purple sweater that immediately made the sterile interview room feel warmer. "Hi, Sophie," Dr. Chen said, settling into a chair across from us. "I brought some art supplies in case you like to draw while we talk. Sometimes it's easier to tell stories when our hands are busy." Sophie looked to me uncertainly. The past hour had been overwhelming for an 8-year-old, full of adult conversations she didn't fully understand and implications that frightened her. "It's okay, baby," I said, smoothing her hair. "Dr. Sarah is one of the people I told you about, the ones who help keep children safe. Will you stay with me, Mommy?" Dr. Chen glanced at Detective Rodriguez, who shook her head slightly. "Your mommy will be right next door," Dr. Chen explained gently. "She can see you through the window and you can see her. But sometimes it's easier to talk about private things when it's just us girls." As they led Sophie to an adjacent room with a one-way mirror, my heart felt like it was being torn from my chest. Through the glass, I watched Dr. Chen spread out paper and crayons, engaging Sophie in what looked like casual conversation. But I knew this was the moment of truth, when my daughter would either confirm or deny the suspicions that had brought us here. "Mrs. Hartwell," Detective Rodriguez said, settling beside me. "While Dr. Chen talks with Sophie, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." I pulled out my phone, realizing with a start that I'd left it at home as Maria had instructed. "I don't have the evidence with me. Our housekeeper, Maria Santos, she's been recording things. She has videos on her phone showing inappropriate behavior." We'll get those recordings, but first I need your account. When did you first suspect something was wrong? The question forced me to examine my own failures as a mother. I didn't suspect anything, I said, shame burning through me. Not until last night when Maria told me. I was completely blind to what was happening to my own daughter. That's more common than you think, Detective Rodriguez said without judgment. Perpetrators within families are often skilled at manipulation and maintaining facades. Tell me about your husband's behavior, his relationship with Sophie, any changes you might have noticed. For the next hour, I recounted everything I could remember. David's insistence on handling all technology in our home. His eagerness to volunteer for Sophie's bedtime routines and bath times. The way he'd gradually isolated me from Sophie's daily life by encouraging my work schedule and praising my artistic temperament that supposedly made me ill-suited for the mundane aspects of parenting. He made me feel like I was doing Sophie a favor by letting him handle the boring parts of childcare. I realized as I spoke. Bath time, bedtime stories, help with homework. He positioned himself as the more patient parent, the one who really understood her needs. And your work schedule allowed him plenty of opportunities for private time with Sophie? Yes. I often work late at my gallery, sometimes travel for art acquisitions. David always encouraged it, said he was happy to hold down the fort at home. The words tasted bitter now. I thought I was lucky to have such a supportive husband. Through the window, I watched Sophie drawing with intense concentration while Dr. Chen sat beside her, occasionally asking questions that made Sophie pause and consider her responses. My daughter's body language was relaxed, comfortable, as if she was relieved to finally have permission to talk about things she'd been forced to keep secret. Mrs. Hartwell, Detective Rodriguez continued, I need to ask about your intimate relationship with your husband. Did he ever exhibit any unusual behaviors or preferences that concerned you? The question made me uncomfortable, but I forced myself to consider it seriously. No, nothing that seemed abnormal. David was always very attentive to my needs. If anything, he seemed like the ideal husband physically. No requests for role-playing scenarios, unusual filming or photography, anything involving age-inappropriate content? God, no. The suggestion made me nauseous. Our physical relationship was completely normal, as far as I knew. But even as I said it, I wondered what else I'd been blind to. If David could systematically abuse Sophie while maintaining the facade of a loving father, what other deceptions might I have missed? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression grave but controlled. Could I speak with you both privately? She asked. We stepped into the hallway, leaving Sophie contentedly drawing at the small table. Through the window, I could see her creating what looked like a house with stick figures around it. Sophie has disclosed extensive inappropriate contact, Dr. Chen said without preamble. The abuse appears to have been ongoing for approximately 18 months, escalating gradually from boundary violations to more serious offenses. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. 18 months. A year and a half of systematic abuse while I'd gone about my daily life, completely oblivious to my daughter's suffering. She's been very brave in sharing details, but it's clear she's been thoroughly groomed, Dr. Chen continued. The perpetrator convinced her that the activities were normal expressions of father-daughter love, special games that proved how much he cared about her. What exactly did he do to her? The question scraped my throat raw. Dr. Chen glanced at Detective Rodriguez, who nodded. Inappropriate touching escalating to more serious contact. Photography and video recording of the abuse. And Mrs. Hartwell, Sophie mentioned that her father told her other little girls do these same activities with their daddies, and that someday she might meet some of those other children. The implication hit me like a physical blow. David wasn't just abusing Sophie. He was potentially connected to a network of predators, possibly trafficking content or even planning to introduce Sophie to other victims. We need to arrest him immediately, I said, my voice rising with panic. If he finds out we're here, if he realizes Sophie has talked, we're already coordinating that, Detective Rodriguez assured me. Units are en route to his office location now. Mrs. Hartwell, I need to ask, do you have somewhere safe to stay? Family, friends who your husband doesn't have access to? The question highlighted another aspect of David's control I hadn't fully recognized. Over the years, he'd gradually discouraged my friendships, always with reasonable explanations. My college friends were dramatic and exhausting. My sister lived too far away and had her own problems. My work colleagues were professional contacts, not real friends. My sister lives in Portland, I said weakly. But David has all our financial accounts, credit cards, everything. I don't even have access to our bank statements. We'll help you navigate the financial aspects. Right now, the priority is keeping you and Sophie safe while we build our case. A commotion in the main lobby caught our attention. Through the glass doors, I could see officers escorting someone in handcuffs toward a processing area. My heart stopped as I recognized the expensive jeans and button-down shirt David had worn to his office that morning. "Is that him?" Detective Rodriguez asked, following my gaze. I nodded, unable to speak. David's face was a mask of controlled fury, his jaw clenched as he walked between the officers. Even in handcuffs, he carried himself with an authority that suggested this was all a misunderstanding that would soon be cleared up. "Good," Detective Rodriguez said with satisfaction. "That makes things much simpler." But as I watched my husband being processed into the system, I felt none of the relief I'd expected. Instead, a new kind of terror crept through me. David was brilliant, wealthy, and connected. He would hire the best lawyers, exploit every technicality, present himself as the wrongfully accused victim of a vindictive wife and manipulative housekeeper. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that a man capable of what David had done to Sophie would not go quietly into custody. This was just the beginning of a much longer, more dangerous game. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Dr. Chen's voice pulled me back to the present. "Sophie is asking for you. She's finished telling me about the difficult things, and now she'd like her mommy." I rushed back into the interview room, where Sophie looked up from her drawing with eyes that seemed older than they had this morning. The picture she'd created showed a house with 3 stick figures, 2 small ones holding hands on one side, and a larger figure separated from them by what looked like bars. "I told Dr. Sarah about Daddy's special games," Sophie said quietly. "She said I was very brave." I knelt beside her chair, pulling her into my arms. "You were incredibly brave, baby. I'm so proud of you for telling the truth." "Is Daddy going to be angry with me?" The question broke my heart all over again. After everything David had done to her, Sophie was still worried about disappointing him, still felt responsible for protecting his feelings. "Daddy can't be angry with you anymore," I said firmly. "The police officers are going to make sure he can't hurt you or make you feel scared." "Good," Sophie said with a decisiveness that surprised me. I didn't like the special games. They made my tummy feel funny, and I didn't want to do them anymore. The simple honesty of her statement was devastating. My 8-year-old daughter had been trying to resist her abuser, had known on some level that what was happening was wrong, but had been too small and powerless to stop it. "You never have to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable ever again," I promised. "From now on, it's just going to be you and me, and we're going to make sure you're safe and happy." Detective Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hartwell, we need to discuss immediate arrangements. Our social services coordinator is here to help with temporary housing and support services." The next several hours passed in a blur of paperwork, interviews, and logistical arrangements. Sophie and I were placed in a family shelter designed specifically for domestic violence and child abuse situations. The location was confidential, the security was comprehensive, and the staff was trained to help families navigate the complex legal and emotional aftermath of abuse. As we settled into our small but comfortable room that evening, Sophie curled up beside me on the narrow bed. She'd been remarkably resilient throughout the day, adapting to each new situation with the flexibility that had probably helped her survive months of abuse. "Mommy," she said softly as I tucked her in. "Are we going to be okay?" I looked at my daughter's face in the dim light from the hallway, so trusting despite everything she'd endured. "Yes, baby. We're going to be better than okay. It might take some time, and it might be scary sometimes, but we're going to build a new life that's safe and happy." Without Daddy? Without Daddy. Sophie considered this for a moment, then nodded. Good. I love Daddy, but I don't want him to do the special games anymore. As my daughter drifted off to sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning our future. Tomorrow would bring court hearings, custody arrangements, and the beginning of a legal battle that could stretch on for months or years. David would fight back with every resource at his disposal, and I would need to be stronger than I'd ever been to protect Sophie from further harm. But tonight, for the first time in 18 months, my daughter was sleeping safely. No cameras were recording her. No one was planning to violate her trust and innocence. No predator was calculating when next to strike. Tonight, we were free. And that was enough to begin with. Outside our window, the city hummed with Saturday night activity, millions of people going about their lives unaware of the small revolution that had taken place in one family's existence. By morning, the story would begin to spread, through court documents, police reports, and the inevitable media attention that followed cases like ours. But right now, it was just Sophie and me, beginning the long journey back to safety, trust, and healing. The road ahead would be difficult, but we would walk it together, one careful step at a time. 3 weeks later, I sat in the sterile conference room of the district attorney's office, watching prosecutor Amanda Walsh spread evidence photos across the mahogany table. Each image was a violation in itself, screenshots from David's computer showing the systematic documentation of his crimes against Sophie. The digital forensics team recovered over 300 files from his encrypted drives, Amanda said, her voice clinical despite the horrific nature of the evidence. The metadata shows the abuse began approximately 2 years ago, not 18 months as initially disclosed. 2 years. Sophie had been only 6 when it started. The number hit me like a physical blow, adding another layer of guilt to the weight I already carried. How could I have been so blind for so long? Mrs. Hartwell, Amanda continued, I need to prepare you for what David's defense team is planning. They're going to argue that you orchestrated this entire scenario as revenge for discovering an affair. What affair? I looked up sharply from the photos, one they're fabricating. They've hired a private investigator to create a narrative that David was planning to leave you for another woman, and that you found out and decided to destroy him using Sophie as a weapon. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Not content with abusing our daughter, David was now prepared to use her trauma as a legal shield, positioning himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife scheme. Do they have any evidence of this supposed affair? They're manufacturing it. Doctored text messages, staged photographs, paid testimony from an actress posing as his mistress. David's cybersecurity background gives him the technical skills to create convincing digital evidence. I thought about the man I'd married, the one who'd convinced me he was protecting our family with his expertise in digital security. Now that same expertise was being weaponized against Sophie and me. What about Maria's recordings? The forensic evidence from Sophie's examination? All solid, all admissible. But David's team will argue that Maria was recruited by you to fabricate evidence, that she was motivated by the promise of financial reward or immigration assistance. Amanda pulled out another folder, this one thick with legal documents. There's more. David's lawyers have filed counter-allegations. They're claiming you're mentally unstable, that you've been emotionally abusing Sophie and coaching her to make false accusations. The systematic nature of David's defense strategy was staggering. He'd had weeks in jail to plan this assault on my credibility, working with expensive attorneys to craft a narrative that would paint him as the real victim. They're requesting a psychological evaluation of both you and Sophie, Amanda continued. Court-ordered, conducted by an expert of their choosing. Can they do that? Yes, and we can't oppose it without looking like we have something to hide. But Mrs. Hartwell, I need you to understand something crucial. This is David's last desperate gambit. The physical evidence against him is overwhelming. His own computer files show clear documentation of abuse, and Sophie's forensic examination corroborated her testimony in multiple ways. Through the conference room window, I could see the city going about its normal business. People hurrying to meetings, grabbing coffee, living their ordinary lives while I sat in this sterile room discussing the systematic destruction of my family. "How is Sophie handling all this?" Amanda asked, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern. The question brought fresh tears to my eyes. Sophie had been remarkably resilient in many ways, adapting to our new living situation and eagerly participating in therapy sessions with Dr. Chen. But she still asked about David regularly, still worried about his feelings, still carried the psychological burden of a child who'd been taught that she was responsible for adult emotions and decisions. "She's doing better than I expected, but she still loves him," I admitted. "That's the part I struggle with most. She knows what he did was wrong, but she misses the father she thought she had." "That's completely normal," Amanda assured me. "Children can't just stop loving an abusive parent. The therapeutic process helps them separate the person they loved from the actions that harmed them." A knock interrupted our conversation. Amanda's assistant peered in, her expression urgent. "Ms. Walsh? David Hartwell's attorney is here. He says it's about a plea negotiation." Amanda and I exchanged glances. Any plea discussion at this stage would likely involve David attempting to minimize his sentence by providing information about other perpetrators or victims. "Send him to conference room B," Amanda instructed. "Mrs. Hartwell, you don't have to be present for this. I want to hear what he has to say." 20 minutes later, I found myself face to face with Martin Chambers, David's lead defense attorney. Chambers was exactly what I'd expected: expensively dressed, coldly professional, and utterly without conscience about defending a child predator. "My client is prepared to enter a guilty plea to reduced charges," Chambers began without preamble, "in exchange for a sentence of 5 to 7 years with possibility of parole in 3. Amanda's response was immediate and emphatic. "Absolutely not. The evidence warrants the maximum sentence under state law. My client has information about a network of individuals engaged in similar activities," Chambers continued smoothly. "Names, locations, digital evidence that could lead to the prosecution of dozens of other offenders." The room fell silent. David wasn't just a predator. He was connected to a larger network of abusers. The implications were staggering. How many other children were suffering while their abusers traded information and content? "What kind of network?" Amanda asked carefully. "I'm not authorized to discuss specifics without a signed plea agreement. But I can tell you that my client's cooperation could lead to the rescue of multiple children currently in dangerous situations." I thought about Sophie, about the 18 months of abuse she'd endured while I remained oblivious. Somewhere out there, other children were living that same nightmare right now, trapped by adults who were supposed to protect them. "Mrs. Hartwell," Amanda said quietly, "this decision doesn't have to be made today. What would the plea involve exactly?" I interrupted. Chambers consulted his notes. "Guilty plea to second-degree sexual abuse of a minor, production of child pornography, and distribution of explicit material. 5 to 7 years in state prison, mandatory registration as a sex offender, supervised probation upon release, and complete cooperation with federal investigators. And if we reject the plea, then we proceed to trial where my client will vigorously contest all charges. Trials are traumatic for child victims, Mrs. Hartwell. Sophie would have to testify, be cross-examined, relive her trauma in a public forum." The threat was subtle, but clear. Accept the reduced sentence or put Sophie through the additional trauma of a public trial. David was still manipulating the situation, still using our daughter's well-being as leverage. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course," Chambers replied, gathering his papers. "But I should mention that this offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we proceed to trial with a full defense that will necessarily examine your role in creating the circumstances that led to these allegations." After Chambers left, Amanda and I sat in heavy silence. The decision felt impossible, except a reduced sentence that might let David out of prison while Sophie was still a teenager, or force my daughter to endure a public trial that could be even more traumatic than the abuse itself. "What would you do?" I asked Amanda. "If Sophie were your daughter?" Amanda was quiet for a long moment. I'd talk to Sophie, not about the legal specifics, but about what she needs to heal. Sometimes the closure of seeing a perpetrator held fully accountable is worth the trauma of testimony. Sometimes it's better to accept a guaranteed conviction with a lesser sentence. That evening, I sat with Sophie in our small apartment. We'd moved out of the shelter into transitional housing after David's arrest. Sophie was working on a puzzle, her concentration complete as she fitted together pieces of a pastoral landscape. "Sophie," I said carefully, "I need to ask you about something important." She looked up from her puzzle, her blue eyes so much like David's that it sometimes took my breath away. "What, Mommy? You know Daddy did things that were wrong and that's why he's in jail now?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Dr. Sarah explained it to me. Daddy made bad choices about how to touch me, and grown-ups who make those choices have to go to jail to learn better." The simple clarity of her understanding was both heartbreaking and encouraging. Months of therapy had helped Sophie develop age-appropriate language for her trauma, without burdening her with adult complexities. Well, the people who decide how long Daddy stays in jail want to know if you'd be okay talking to them about what happened. It would be in a special room with people who are trained to help children feel safe. Sophie considered this, her small fingers absently moving puzzle pieces around the table. "Would Daddy be there?" "He might be, but he couldn't talk to you or come near you. There would be lots of grown-ups there to keep you safe." "Would you be there too?" "Yes, baby. I'd be there the whole time." Sophie was quiet for several minutes, working on her puzzle with the focused intensity that had helped her process difficult emotions throughout this ordeal. "Will it help other kids who have daddies like mine?" she asked finally. The question stunned me. Even at 8 years old, Sophie was thinking beyond her own situation to the welfare of other potential victims. "It might," I said honestly. "Sometimes when people tell the truth about bad things that happened, it helps protect other children." Sophie nodded decisively. "Then I want to do it. But can I bring Mr. Elephant?" She gestured to her favorite stuffed animal, the one that had comforted her through countless difficult nights. "Of course, sweetheart. You can bring anything that makes you feel safe." The next morning, I called Amanda with our decision. Sophie would testify and we would reject David's plea offer. The trial would be difficult, but my daughter deserved to see her abuser held fully accountable for his crimes. 6 months later, I watched from the courtroom gallery as the jury foreman read the verdict. "Guilty on all counts." David showed no emotion as the words were spoken, his face a mask of the control he'd wielded so effectively throughout our marriage. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. By the time he was eligible for release, Sophie would be 23 years old, a grown woman with hopefully a lifetime of healing behind her. As the bailiff led David away in shackles, he turned to look at me one last time. His expression held no remorse, no acknowledgement of the damage he'd caused. Even now, facing decades in prison, he seemed to view himself as the victim of circumstances beyond his control. Sophie, who had testified with remarkable courage and clarity, was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. We'd agreed that she didn't need to see her father led away in chains. Instead, she was at her therapy session with Dr. Chen, working on the ongoing process of healing and recovery. After the trial, Maria had returned to Guatemala to be with her family, but not before testifying with devastating effectiveness about what she'd witnessed and recorded. Her courage in coming forward had not only saved Sophie, but had led to the arrest of 12 other individuals in David's network. Dozens of children had been rescued from ongoing abuse. That evening, Sophie and I sat on the floor of our new apartment, a real home we'd rented with the settlement money from our divorce. Sophie was working on another puzzle, this one showing a garden full of butterflies. "The butterflies are pretty," she observed, holding up a piece with bright orange wings. "They are," I agreed. "Did you know that butterflies start as caterpillars? They have to go through a difficult time in a cocoon before they can become beautiful and fly free." Sophie considered this, fitting the butterfly piece into place. "Like us?" "Like us," I confirmed, pulling her into my arms. "We went through something very difficult, but we're becoming stronger and more beautiful because of how brave we were." That night, After Sophie fell asleep in her own room in our safe apartment, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, David was beginning his first night of what would be many years in prison. Other predators had been arrested, other children rescued, other families beginning their own journeys toward healing. The road ahead would still be challenging. Sophie would need years of therapy to fully process her trauma. I would need to rebuild my ability to trust my own judgment after being so thoroughly deceived. We would both need to learn how to live without fear, how to believe in safety again, but tonight, Sophie was sleeping peacefully in her own bed, protected by locks and alarms and the knowledge that the person who'd hurt her could never reach her again. Tonight, we were free. And that freedom, hard-won and carefully protected, was worth every difficult step of the journey that had brought us here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth and healing. But tonight we were safe, we were together, and we were finally, truly free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.